That's the not autobiographical part, right?
Well, it's not entirely autobiographical.
No, I said
no.
it's the not autobiographical.
Well, no, there's part of it is.
Oh, is
Yeah,
it?
well, I'm married for the second time, and so part of Enzo is part of me also because I had a daughter who's a little older than Enzo's daughter in the book. And I know exactly how difficult it is to continue a relationship with a daughter after a breakup of a marriage. And so, yes, I was able to draw on personal experience from that, but there all resemblance ends, apart from the fact that he's of a certain age now and has a ponytail and lives
And he's
in France.
tall.
And, yeah. But, so yeah, so this is like 20 years ago he left, set up home with his French mistress who got pregnant and then died in childbirth and left him with another daughter, Sophie, to bring up on his own. So 20 years on, Sophie is just coming up to her 20th birthday. His Scottish daughter, Kirsty, who has simply refused to speak to him for about the last 15 years, is now 27. She's working as an interpreter in Paris. He's never developed another relationship because Pascal, his French lover, was really the one for him. And so he's never really found anybody else since that time. So he's on his own. But when he left Scotland to go to France, he had to give up his forensic science basically because his grasp of the language wasn't good enough and he wouldn't have been accepted into the French police scientifique, as it's called. So he ended up teaching biology, which was his subject that he'd done at university, university in Toulouse, and that's where he is at the beginning of the book.
And along comes, this is the book it's called Extraordinary People, published by Poison Pen Press. And I've described it to a lot of people as Donna Tartt meets Dan Brown because there are elements, I don't know that that's fair, but those are recognizable names. And when selling books or publishing books, you try to interest readers who've liked an author that they can recognize in a new book. And why do I say that? I mean, what are the elements that, would drive me to call it that?
I think because there's, I suppose the Dan Brown-esque part of it is the kind of, it's almost like a treasure hunt for body parts with clues that have to be cracked, leading to piece by piece. And the other aspect of it, I suppose the Donna Tartt element of it, is the group of highly intelligent people who've determined that they can do things that are above the law, shall we say, because they are or consider themselves to be extraordinary people.
I think that's a title you take from Dostoevsky, isn't it?
Yes, yeah. It's in The Murderer, and Dostoevsky has written a thesis expounding the theory that ordinary people are bound and constrained by the law, laws which are made to bind and constrain them. And those laws are in general made by the extraordinary people who rule them and run the country or the society. And those extraordinary people often consider themselves to be above the law. And so that was a theme that I was exploring in the book because I'd got interested in the subject of the French elite, a kind of super class of super intelligent people who run the country. And this was something that, even though I'd been living there for a number of years, I hadn't fully appreciated. But there is a kind of top layer in the educational system in France, above university level, called the Grande École. It's literally big schools. And these really only accept the creme de la creme of the intelligentsia from French academia. And the top school of those is called the École Nationale d'Administration, which is abbreviated to ENA, right. They call it.
So it's the school of for administrators, for the School of Administration, and we should say that Grande École, I've always actually don't call it so much big school as great school. I mean,
great
you can,
school.
well, grand in French can be translated as big or large, but it can also be translated as great.
Well, they certainly consider themselves to be great.
Exactly. But anyway, they're called, it's called ENA, right,
yes.
for short, and so people who go there are called énarques.
Énarques, yeah. So all these former pupils of anarchs literally run France.
Like Jacques Chirac?
Jacques Chirac is an anarch. Dominique de Villepin, the Prime Minister, is an anarch. The Ségolène Royal, who's the leftist candidate in the presidential election in April, is an anarch. Her husband, who runs the Socialist Party, is an anarch. Half the cabinet are anarchs. Most of the people who run the government-owned utilities are anarchs. And in France as well, France is kind of divided up into, in a similar way that the United States is, into départements, which are with much smaller scale, but the equivalent of states. There are 100 of them. But they're run by people who are not elected. They're people who are appointed, so it's a very strange system. It's not what you would call democratic. These are called prefects, literally.
Right.
And they run the administration of each département of France, and they are, to a man, and occasionally a woman, anarchs. France is run top to bottom by anarchs.
If I remember it right, I think this is all a fallout from Napoleon, who was an actual administrative genius.
Well, he was, yeah.
He really was. I mean, I don't think that people realize today, because you think of him, you know, just as running around conquering things and making the mistake of going to Russia in the winter, which you know, was a flaw in his otherwise relatively brilliant career. But he was an administrative genius, no question about it. Sort of like Henry II in England, who was another, and Edward I, who gave England its law system. But and actually the Code Napoleon, which you know is still the legal system, works. But you're right. It is a country that is and run by the civil administration, and getting into the civil administration is sort of the American equivalent of going to Harvard or Yale to be an anarch. It's about the closest thing we have. There's a sort of little tight, you know, diffuse. I mean, Bill Clinton was from Arkansas, but didn't he go to, I think he went to Yale, didn't he?
Could have.
I think so.
You're more of an expert
whatever.
than
But
me.
anyway, there is sort of an old boys network in the United States that gets broken quite often. But in France, it's much more appropriate. And it's a highly competitive system, right? You don't just apply to this thing. Aren't there rigorous exams and juries and?
There are. You have to have at least 3 or 4 degrees from other universities and often other Grande École to get into ENA. And then there's a very, very stringent entrance exam. And even if you get through that, then you have what they call the Grand Oral, which is a 25 or 30-minute interrogation by 5 of the most intelligent people in the land, who will shred you if you show any weakness at all. So it's tough, really tough getting in there.
And was this started by de Gaulle?
It was just after the Second World War.
So they've graduated, what, some 4,000 people?
That's right. It's about 4,000.
And they all have basically job openings and job security.
Oh, yes.
By and large.
Oh, yes.
You know, it's such an interesting, I mean, beyond that, there's that very interesting question that nobody has resolved since Plato first posed it, which is, you know, who shall govern the governors? If you, I mean, that's not what your book is about,
No.
but I do think it's an interesting corollary to a system like that is, in fact, you know, who's going to look at the people doing ruling and smack them.
Yes, exactly. Where are the checks and balances and controls?
Yeah, I mean, our system isn't wonderful either, but we do have some sort of, you know, I mean, the parliamentary system in Britain allows that to some degree, but the French do have that because so little of it is elected and so much of it is in fact appointed, which makes it a bit different. But I also think a question that you raise in this book that really is interesting is what does a group of people who consider themselves to be far superior to everybody else do when someone they know in that group lets the side down, as you Brits would say. And I don't want to say any more because we'd spoil the plot of the book, but I thought that was a really interesting sort of premise, you know, what is a group of people who really are smart, really are consider themselves elite, who are in fact blatantly elitist, do when one of them, you know, does something that they feel debases them all.
I think they want to assert their intelligence and their intellect and demonstrate their superiority is the instinct of those kind of people.